It all began when I visited a place I would never have gone. After listening to one of our more obnoxious clients' complaints all morning, I had just dropped him off at the airport and wasn't in a rush to return to the office. It was a gloomy Tuesday, making it difficult to look forward to reviewing contracts in the afternoon. I therefore made a quick stop at a dull-looking bar restaurant a mile from the airport with the intention of enjoying a leisurely lunch and a few beers before returning to the salt mines. As I was sipping my beer in a booth, contemplating the difficulties of finding a good burger in this world, I noticed a couple entering the restaurant. I observed them as they took a seat side by side in a booth across the room from me. The woman was a pretty blonde in a tight pink short-sleeved top and a short skirt that flaunted her gorgeous legs. Her partner appeared to be an aspiring thug who was unable to pull it off. He was dressed in jeans and a black leather jacket, but his lack of weight made it difficult for him to pull off the swagger he was trying. You'll understand why I'm so interested in this happy couple when I tell you that the woman was my sister-in-law Sailor, and the man she was with was most definitely not my brother Dave. Even worse, it was obvious they were more than just passing acquaintances. The waitress brought them drinks, and they were necking each other uncontrollably in the booth as soon as they got their hands on them. The guy slid one hand up her thigh until it vanished under the short skirt, and I watched in dismay. With a sigh, Sailor released their kiss and rested her head against the booth's back. It was inevitable that I would take action. The question was not if I would. Would I be able to control myself enough not to beat the living hell out of them both here in the restaurant? I was never fond of Sailor. When my brother first started dating her, I didn't like her, and I was depressed when he declared they were getting married after just 4 months because he was deeply in love with her. At the age of 23, I was certain that Dave had no idea what he was getting himself into. However, there was no way to explain to him that Sailor wasn't the stars and moon. She was a pretty, happy, somewhat shallow, and selfish girl, at least to him and me. Neither as fascinating nor as intelligent as Dave himself. My fun-loving brother loved her because she was vivacious and bubbly, and it seemed to me that they both had Sailor as their favorite person. She liked that he would stop at nothing to help her. They appeared to have had a very happy first 3 years of marriage, which surprised me. However, the scene unfolding mere feet away from me implied that the good times had come to an end. The jerk she was seeing now had his other hand around Sailor's waist, working her over with a kiss on her neck. She was startled, to put it mildly, when I sat down across the table from them and said, "Well, hello, Sailor." Her eyes were closed, so she didn't see me approach. What a pleasant surprise. In fact, it was funny. Her a-hole boyfriend removed his hands from her and turned to face me as her eyes suddenly opened. Her expression changed from being momentarily startled to stunned to truly shocked. She froze, staring at me blankly as her mouth fell. His expression remained startled for a brief moment before becoming irritated. I continued politely before he could say anything, "How have you been? How is Dave doing?" Then I said, "My name is Will," turning to face the a-hole and holding out my hand. "I'm the brother-in-law of Sailor's husband." His eyes widened. He ignored my hand and sat motionless. Shelley started to feel better and babblingly said, "Will, what a nice surprise. Introducing Robbie, a friend from an old friend." "Robbie, are your fingers fully inserted into her holes there?" With a friendly smile on my face, I inquired. "It looks like you were really getting her going." Sailor let out a gasp. It seems that she had been hoping that I hadn't seen their activities. Abruptly, Robbie leaped to his feet, muttered, "I gotta go," and left the restaurant quickly, not even turning to look at Sailor. "He seems like a nice guy," I remarked to Sailor in passing. "Why'd he leave so suddenly?" I was completely frozen with rage inside. This was how the woman who my brother loved and would do anything for treated him? Playing around with a low-class person who has greasy hair and an unattractive Matt Dillon mustache. Sailor's pale face betrayed her fear. "Will, I believe you might have misunderstood. We were just that, we were." She became quieter. She was at a loss on how to finish that sentence. Before I spoke, I gave her a minute of my attention. "You lousy, cheating 304. Even though I didn't say much, I'm sure my rage was clear. Dave loves you and provides for all of your needs. But isn't that insufficient for you? You gotta go screwing around with sleazy jerks like this one behind his back. I wonder how long this has been going on. How many more men are you taking advantage of? What do you suppose Dave will make of all of this? No, Will, please, she seized my hand and held onto it tenaciously. Please, please, you can't tell him, please. I didn't tell my brother that his wife was having an extramarital affair, I just stared at her. Either Shell was too stunned to think clearly, or he was dumber than dirt. Since we were young, Dave has been my best friend. Shell had to understand that even for him, I would sacrifice anything. I withdrew my hand from hers. What keeps me from telling him? Isn't it fair for him to discover his true spouse? Her thoughts were racing, and her eyes were wild. Will, pay attention, you can't tell him. He will be extremely hurt. Will, if you swear not to tell him, if you don't. I smiled as I reclined. This ought to work out well. And what would she give in exchange? To sabotage me as well? Sailor's expression changed as if she was making a decision. Will, I'll tell you the whole story about it as long as you swear not to tell Dave. She is also participating. She has been unfaithful to you. I let out a loud laugh. Well done, Sailor. I was curious about your thoughts, but I never imagined it would be as absurd as that. I'll give you points for creativity. Shell just gave me a steady glance. Will, I'm not kidding. She has been dating this man from the fitness center for a few weeks now at the latest. I was a little uneasy about her certainty, but I knew it couldn't be true. We had dated during our second year at Kenyon College, Clara and I. After graduation, we moved in together, and a year later, we were married. That rounded out our 10 years together and 7 happy years of marriage. Clara loved me very much. She was the most honest person I knew. She was also sensible, kind, and thoughtful. She also cherished me. As certain as I was of my own love for her, I was also certain of this. Shell bent over. She must have sensed that I was lost. Will, I'm being honest with you. I learned about it from Clara last week. He was very large, she said. I attempted to gather my own thoughts while observing her expression. For now at least, Sailor had overcome her own fear. She didn't appear to be telling a crazy or desperate story, rather, she exuded confidence and competence. Even though I still couldn't believe what she was saying, I also found it impossible to ignore at that point. Upon initially joining the health club, Clara had expressed some reluctance, and I had utilized the exercise room significantly more frequently than her for a few years. However, she had started exercising 3 times a week and had become a regular. Additionally, there had been a few strange incidents lately at home, when she appeared to be distracted or to be avoiding my gaze while we were seated at the dinner table. Sailor seemed to be waiting for me to do something, so I glanced back at her. She didn't need to know that I couldn't possibly hide her infidelity from Dave. And in one way or another, I had to know the truth about it. I said, "All right, Sailor," very slowly. "Maybe we can come to an agreement about this." I continued after giving it more thought. I won't allow Clara to bully me around. I won't tell Dave what I saw this afternoon if you can help me get the inside scoop on her. That is, provided you make a vow never to see that jerk Robbie or any other man save Dave. Her expression lit up with relief. Will, I swear. I promise you that. As if that had any value in my opinion. She said to me, "What do you want me to do?" I'd like to hear Clara tell it all, in her own words. I'll give you a tape recorder that you can keep hidden in your flat. You extend an invitation to Clara, bring her some wine, and engage in some girl talk. Ask her to fill you in on everything. I'd like to know the guy's identity, when and how they started dating, how long they've been together, and why she feels it's acceptable to cheat on me behind my back with another man. While conversing with Sailor, I became aware that I was already partially buying into her ludicrous tale of Clara's infidelity. The thought enraged me. Shell was giving a nod. All right, I'm capable of that. It's likely that you'll have to comfort her. In order to make it feel like a truly intimate conversation, be sure to tell her everything about your affair as well. In addition, is Robbie the only person who's been getting into your pants, or are there others? I sarcastically asked. She quickly said, flushed, he's the only one, and for a moment I didn't believe her. 20 minutes later, I was contemplating the end of Dave's marriage and possibly my own as I drove back to the office. You might think that after seeing what Sailor was doing, I would have called Dave first. I knew, though, that I couldn't. Dave was the gregarious and extroverted younger brother, and I had always been the dependable older one. In high school and college, he had a large number of girlfriends, but none of them lasted very long because he was not shy and could talk to anyone. It was once said by one of Dave's college roommates that he could talk the pants off a snake. When you think about it, it really doesn't make sense, but we all understood what he meant. However, everything changed when Dave met Clara, for whatever reason. He went from being a confident, charming guy who attracted women to a lovesick schoolboy. In about a month or two, Clara had totally enthralled Dave. There was not a single person who could try to dissuade him from marrying her. Sailor was utterly adored by Dave, she was impervious to wrong. I once made the error of gently berating her for a crude comment she'd made to her mother. As a result, he became extremely angry and stopped communicating with me for a week. I knew that until I had the tape, I couldn't talk to Dave because he wouldn't accept that she was having an affair unless he heard her say it herself. I realized that I was hoping against hope that somehow, Shell was just lying or wrong, that Clara was faithful to me. But it seemed less and less likely. Sailor could have lied to me out of desperation, but then I would just have been even angrier when I learned it was all true. When I got to my office, I took out a pad and made some notes about what steps I'd have to take if the worst turned out to be true: credit cards, selling the house, title to the cars, etc. How I hoped I'd be able to throw that sheet of paper away in a few days. When I got home at dinner time, and Clara was cheerfully humming in the kitchen as she put food on the table, she greeted me with a big hug and a kiss, and seemed the same loving wife I'd been happy to see at the end of the day for the past 7 years. I knew I'd have to conceal my suspicions for a few days, play the innocent husband, but it wasn't easy. I loved her, but underneath the surface, I was furious and hurt, and not sure whether I should be. We chatted amiably through dinner, but during dessert, when she mentioned she'd worked out at the health club that day, I couldn't resist a little probing. "You've been so conscientious about your workouts lately, sweetheart," I said casually. "Are they giving out free ice cream down at the club these days?" She laughed, but I noticed a slight flush come to her face. "No, honey, I've just been enjoying how good it feels to have a good, sweaty workout, then shower and come home to my loving husband. Plus, a few weeks ago, those black slacks you like were starting to be a bit too tight for me, and now they fit perfectly." She beamed at me affectionately, and I was struck by how lovely she looked and how much I cared for her. God help her if she really was cheating on me, and God help me too. Never mind what the court calendar officially said, my marriage actually ended exactly 1 week later, on another Tuesday. Sailor and I had set it all up. I got a small tape recorder for her to hide in her living room, and she arranged for Clara to drop in for lunch on Tuesday afternoon. Clara had a day off from work, and Sailor doesn't have a job. I sat all that afternoon in my office pretending to work, thinking only about what the women were talking about and what it would mean for my life. At 4:30, Sailor called and said, "We're all done," and Clara just gone home. "Did she talk to you about it?" I asked, still praying this was all a mistake. "Oh, yes," Sailor giggled, "she was obviously a little drunk. I told her about Robbie, and she told me about Moran." "All about Moran," she giggled again. "It seems he is a really big fella." I realized I was squeezing the phone so tight my fingers ached. "All right," I said, "I'll drop by in 20 minutes. When I got to Sailor's, she met me at the door with the tape recorder in her hand. "Now remember, Will, you promised." "Yes, Sailor, he won't hear a word from me, and you can't let Clara know that I taped her, ever, or else she'll be furious and she'll tell Dave." I just nodded, then turned and left. That evening was one of the most painful of my life. I knew I couldn't listen to the tape until Clara was asleep. Until then, I had to keep pretending to be the loving husband. Clara was still a little tipsy. She told me she'd spent the afternoon with Sailor and had a lot of wine. What's more, she was amorous. No, make that horny. As soon as the dinner dishes were cleared, she was dragging me towards the bedroom, saying, "Honey, have you got a little something for me tonight?" in a flirtatious tone. Could I do this? Did I want to do this? It occurred to me that it might be the last time I'd ever have sex with Clara. I was still hoping against all reason, that she might not have been unfaithful. So, I followed her into the bedroom, and we had sex. It wasn't making love, at least not for me. My heart was too torn, and my mind too worried. Clara seemed oblivious, though she was eager and responsive. For me, it was bittersweet, pleasurable, but incredibly sad. We rested for a while in one another's arms, then did it again a few minutes later. Clara was fast asleep, snoring gently on her side next to me. I sat in the guest room, the door closed behind me, and listened to the tape. The first few minutes of conversation between Sailor and Clara were breezy and casual. Sailor kept the wine flowing, and after a little while, told Clara she had a confession to make. She went on to talk about her affair with the a-hole Robbie. It was quite clear that Clara knew about the affair already. Sailor was just giving her the juicy details to soften her up. In fact, Sailor did her job beautifully. She even confessed with a laugh that Robbie was just the latest, not the best. There had been a guy named Ellis, but unfortunately, he'd moved out of town. Clara giggled and pretended to be shocked, but she seemed to be enjoying the story. Listening to the sleazy story didn't have much effect on me. I already knew what Sailor was, and the explicit details would just make it that much easier to convince Dave that she really had cheated on him. I waited anxiously for what I knew was coming, resisting the urge to fast forward the tape. Finally, Sailor turned the conversation to Clara. "So, sweetie, let me hear your story now," she said. She giggled. "All you've told me is that you met him at the health club and that he's well endowed." My body froze at the sound of Clara's voice as she laughed and said, "Oh, yes, he's amazing. By far the biggest one I've ever seen or felt." She giggled and went on, "I didn't think it would even fit inside me at first, but oh my God, does it ever fit?" At that, both women laughed hard. I stopped the tape and sat back in my chair. My marriage was over. Did I even want to hear the rest? I could let my lawyer listen to it. I thought for a while, then switched the machine back on. I might as well face it all now, get the whole story out, deal with all the anger and pain, and begin to figure out what the rest of my life was going to be like. "How did it start?" Sailor was asking. "Well, the first thing I've got to tell you is that I never meant to cheat on Will. I still can't believe I'm doing it, and I feel terrible about it. He and I are so happy together, and I know he'd go crazy if he knew about it. I guess I've just got a bad case of BDF," she laughed, and I heard Sailor say, "BDF? What's that?" Clara laughed again and said, "I'll explain. Just give me some more of that wine. You know, I've been going to the health club for a couple of years now. Working out really bores me, but I just didn't want to get saggy and have Will start to lose interest, you know what I mean. Anyway, a couple of months ago, I started seeing this new trainer working there. Very hot, not that tall, but broad shoulders and amazing muscles. His name is Moran, of all things. Can you believe it? He flirts a lot with all the women, helping them set up the machines, racking weights for them, spotting while they lift, and so on. One day, I saw him talking quietly with Patty Mallister, a woman I used to work with. She's a redhead, really stacked. Well, I watched them chatting, then he disappeared into his office at the back. A couple of minutes later, I happened to glance around, and I saw Patty quietly go into the office. I smiled to myself, since it was clear what was going on, but I still didn't think much about it until later. I'd finished my workout and was starting to change in the locker room when Patty came in. Boy, did she ever look, well, thrilled. She had that dreamy-eyed look and a vague smile, all happy and exhausted at the same time. I said, "Hi, Patty, what's up? You look awfully happy." And she grinned at me and said, "Oh yeah, I've got a bad case of BTF." I said, BTF? And she giggled, looked around to make sure no one could hear her, and answered, big tool fever. Then she sat down and told me all about her and Moran, how he was a sensational sex partner, had a huge tool, really thick, and it drove her crazy. He'd been flirting with her, and then one day got her hot enough to talk her into his office. Since then, they'd been screwing whenever she could get to the club. She said he was incredible, the craziest sex she'd ever had. Needless to say, that got my attention, but I still didn't plan to do anything about it. Patty's divorced, she can play with whoever she likes. But I'm a happily married lady. Still, over the next couple of weeks, I got more and more curious about Moran and responded with more interest when he flirted with me. He brushed against me or touched my shoulder while helping me on the machines, you know? Then one day, I was doing bench presses. The place was pretty empty, no one around, and he came and stood just behind my head as if to spot me. As I looked up, there were his shorts right above my head, and there was that monstrous package bulging out like crazy. I couldn't believe how big and thick it looked in his shorts. He just smiled down at me, knowing what I was looking at. I almost dropped the bar on my chest, but I managed to finish my representatives as I put the bar back up on the rack. He took my hand off the bar and slid it gently down over his shorts. His tool felt as enormous as it looked, and it was hard as a rock. Then, after a couple of minutes, he gently pulled me to my feet, looked around to see no one was there, and led me by the hand into his office. I wasn't thinking, I was kind of dazed. He locked the door behind us, sat me down in a chair, and without a word, pulled off his shorts and stood in front of me. I swear I wasn't thinking at all. We had wild sex. By the time he finished, I was beside myself, exhausted, and totally screwed out. Wow, said Sailor, and it sounded like she really meant it. That sounds unbelievable. And I assume you've kept seeing him? Well, that day I just drifted out of his office and into the shower, all dreamy and weak in the knees. I was wiped out, you know? Then, by the time I cleaned up and got home, the guilt was killing me. I couldn't believe I had cheated on Will, and I was terrified. I just knew he'd see it in my eyes as soon as he got home. But amazingly enough, he didn't. That night was normal, he didn't suspect a thing. He even wanted to make love, but I was afraid he'd feel how loose I was, so I told him I was too tired. But the next night, I really gave him the full treatment. We did it until he couldn't get it up anymore. For 2 weeks, I stayed away from the gym. I just knew I couldn't be anywhere near Moran without being tempted again. Finally, I told myself it had been a one-time thing. I was a grown woman with a wonderful husband, and I could resist him. So, I started going back, and the first couple of times, it was fine. Moran winked at me and flirted a little, but he left me alone, and I thought, this is okay, I'm over this, and I relaxed my guard a little. Then, about a week after that, he caught me again at the bench, and the room was empty, and he got my hand on his tool, and in no time, we were back in his office. Sailor finished her sentence, and it was even better. And, said Clara, kind of dreamily, I can't really describe it, Sailor. I love sex with Will, we always satisfy each other. I'd never even been tempted to fool around before. There's a guy in my office named Alex, incredibly cute and a total flirt. He had a lot of success with the other girls, but he never got anywhere with me. I just wasn't interested. But with Moran, it was like I'd never even been screwed before. I can't believe I'm telling you this, she said, giggling. It's not even that there's anything special about Moran. I'm not the least bit interested in him as a person or a lover or anything. But the sex, just God's gift, she laughed again, and Sailor joined her. I listened to the two of them and felt the anger coursing in my veins. I sat through the rest of the tape, but there wasn't much more. Once she'd had sex with her a second time and gave up all attempts to resist, she'd been doing him 2 to 3 times a week for nearly a month, and there was no sign she was ready to stop. In fact, she said that she'd been enjoying sex with me more lately as well, perhaps because her secret was kind of a turn-on. It was clear that her BTF had overcome whatever guilt she might be feeling about betraying me, me, the love of her life, her husband of 7 years, the man who was completely devoted to her, and who still remembered what forsaking all others was supposed to mean. It took a while to think through my plans, and it was 2:30 a.m. by the time I went to sleep in the guest room. I was done seeing and sleeping next to her, or even talking to her. I slipped into the bedroom and got clothes for the next day without waking her. At 6:30 a.m., I was up and out the door. I left the briefest, coldest note I could without tipping it off, saying, "Bye," calling her "you adulterous witch. Have an early meeting, sorry, forgot to mention it last night." At the office, I made 2 copies of the tape, and by 8:30, I was on the phone. My best friend from college worked at a law firm downtown. "Hey, Eddie, it's Will. I have a big favor to ask. Could you get me an hour this morning with the meanest, most bloodthirsty divorce lawyer in your firm?" There was a silence, and then he said, "Oh my God, Will, not you. I'm so sorry." We talked a little longer, and at precisely 11:15, Eddie showed me into the office of Margaret Adamson, a lead partner in his firm. Eddie had told me she was absolutely terrifying. When she swims in the ocean, the sharks get out of the way is how he put it, and Margaret's look and handshake confirmed that she meant business. I was already glad she'd be my attorney and not an adversary. I played her and Eddie a part of the tape. After hearing the first few moments, Margaret picked up her phone, said, "Hold my calls," and we listened to the rest. When it was over, we sat in silence for a minute. Then she just said, "Okay, what do you want?" "I want to divorce her for adultery, none of this irreconcilable differences. I'll be reasonable about our savings, but I want the house, and she has to take her maiden name back. She doesn't deserve to be Mrs. Will Harris any longer." Margaret nodded, looking at me intently. Then she said, "Excuse me, Will, can you let me and Eddie knock the legal details of this around for a few minutes?" In no more than 5 minutes, I was back in her office, and she was raring to go. "The divorce is easy, and there's no way she will refuse your terms now. You should know that the tape will be inadmissible since she didn't know about it. Oh, by the way, Will, the other person, your sister-in-law, you said, will testify that it's authentic if necessary." "This is where it gets complicated," I said, and explained about Shelley's cheating on my brother, her offer to me, and what was on the first part of the tape. "I haven't told my brother yet, but I have to. He's going to be as devastated as I am, and I can't keep it from him. In fact," I said with an ironic smile, "I wonder, Margaret, whether you'd consider handling his divorce as well." She just looked at Eddie, then back at me. "Let's start by hearing your sister-in-law's part of the tape." I played it for them, and then Margaret and Eddie again huddled without me for a few minutes. When we were sitting together again, she said, "Quite a pair of wives you two." She saw my face and said, "I'm sorry, Will, I shouldn't have said that. Here's the situation. In all probability, the tape would not be admissible against Clara because she didn't know it was being made. On the other hand, Shelley could be subpoenaed and made to testify as to what Clara told her. So, it shouldn't make much difference. Once Clara's attorney hears the tape, he won't be in a position to fight. In your brother Dave's case, the tape is admissible because Shelley knew she was being recorded, so she's got no defense whatsoever. That divorce will be easy as long as he's not totally unreasonable. Then there's the health club. We can sue both them and Moran. Moran won't have much money, presumably, but Eddie and I can pretty much guarantee you a nice, big check from the club, somewhere in the high 6 figures to $1.5 million. The tape could be used in a civil lawsuit, and there's no way in hell they would ever let this get into the newspapers. Think of all the husbands who'd be cancelling their wives' club memberships. She laughed for a moment, though even then she still looked scary. Margaret said she'd get the divorce documents started, and Eddie walked me out of the office. "I am so sorry, Will. Margaret will get you what you want, I guarantee it, but I still feel terrible about what's happened." I tried to smile. "It's okay, Eddie. This just means you and I will have more time to play tennis together." I thanked him and left. The rest of the day, I submerged myself in details. I arranged for a locksmith to meet me at the house at 4:30. I made a dinner date with Dave so I wouldn't be around when Clara came home. I cut off her credit cards and arranged separate accounts for our money. And I wrote her a note. It took several tries, not easy to say goodbye to the love of your life, even under these circumstances. When I finally finished it, I put it in an envelope, wrote Clara's name on the front, and took it home. The locksmith finished by about 5:15. I had a beer, sitting by myself quietly in the kitchen. Then, I taped the note to the outside of the front door, locked it, and left. I knew Clara would be home between 6 o'clock and 6:30. I idly wondered what she'd do first, try the door and find her key didn't work, or read the note. Our marriage is over. Now you'll be free to play around all you want with Moran and his big tool. I've had the locks changed. If you want to get your clothing and personal things, call my attorney. I left Margaret's name and number. She'll arrange for you to have supervised access to the house when I'm not here. I won't be talking to you again. You broke my heart. I loved you as much as any man can love a woman, and I looked forward to our growing old together. Too bad our marriage vows didn't mean as much to you as some sex with a big tool, or as much as they did to me when Dave joined me for dinner. He could tell right away that something was up. We ordered, and I just took a deep breath and said it. She'd been cheating on me. I'm divorcing her. He stared at me, literally open-mouthed. I'm not sure I'd ever seen that before. Oh my God, Will, my God, and are you sure? He took a look at my face and said, sorry, stupid question. Do you want to tell me about it? I did. While we sat and ate, the beers helped, but sharing my hurt and despair with my best friend helped more. He was 100% on my side, no divided loyalties, and it meant a lot. Towards the end of dinner, I said, there's one part of it I haven't told you. Sailor is the one who got me proof. She taped a conversation of her and him talking and then told me the whole sorry business. He looked at me sympathetically and said, I'm just so sorry, Will. And I hope it won't make you angry, but I feel so lucky, you know, having a fantastic wife like Sailor. I'm not surprised she helped you, she's always liked you. I know you haven't always approved of her, but she's... I couldn't let him continue. It was killing me to hear him say these things about his 304 of a wife. I interrupted in the middle of his sentence. Listen, Dave, wait, don't say anything else. Let me pay the bill, and I need you to come back to the house with me. There was a note stuck under the screen door marked Will in flowery handwriting. I dropped it on the hall table without reading it and let him into the guest room. Dave, listen, this is serious. You know I love you, you're my best friend, and I would never do anything to hurt you, right? He regarded me wearily. We didn't usually talk to each other that way. Of course, Will, what the hell? You need to hear the tape Sailor made. Just sit here and listen to it. I'll be in the other room. I rewound the tape to the beginning and pushed the tape recorder over to him, ignoring his surprised look, and left the room. I couldn't stand to be there while he listened. There was quiet at first, except for the murmuring of the voices on the tape. Then a crash, and I figured Dave had thrown an ashtray or something. I heard him pacing, the tape still playing, and then finally, silence. He stomped into the kitchen, staring at me wild-eyed. You son of a witch, Dave! You must have enjoyed this, you 304, knowing the truth about Sailor and keeping it from me, letting me go on and on about how wonderful she is. No, Dave, it wasn't. This must make you feel just great, you prick. You've always hated her, and now you can smile at me and say I told you so for the rest of your life, you creep. I stood up and raised my voice a little. Dave, what did I just find out about it? You think I'm having such a great day? I glared at him, and gradually his face relaxed. I saw his shoulders sag, and he unclenched his fists. He sat down at the table, looking like an old man. I imagined I've looked like that a lot lately myself. Sorry, Will, he said finally. I know you're hurting, just like I am. It's just... You obviously knew about this, why didn't you tell me? Dave, I said as gently as I could, you know how you are about Sailor. You would never have believed me. Remember that fight we had when I criticized something she'd said to Mom? I found out about Sailor a week ago, and I knew that I couldn't possibly tell you. You had to hear it for yourself. I only got the tape from her yesterday. The two of us emptied a few beer bottles while I told Dave the whole story. I began with seeing Sailor and Robbie at the restaurant, then the deal she offered me, the making of the tape, and my conversation with Margaret Adamson. She's handling my divorce, and she'll be happy to represent you too if you want. Our cases are pretty much a shoo-in, she says. We talked late into the night, and then Dave crashed in my guest room. He didn't have the heart to face Sailor. The phone rang several times, but we didn't answer it, and finally, I just left it off the hook. A few days went by, and then a few weeks, and she kept calling for a while, leaving me messages of her crying and begging to talk to me. But I didn't answer or call her back. I just didn't see any reason to talk to her. She tried finding me at work, but I'd asked our receptionist to tip me off, and I ducked out of my office each time she showed up. A couple of times, I saw her car parked in front of the house when I came home from work, so I just drove right by and stayed away for a couple of hours until she left. Margaret Adamson did her work beautifully. The divorce papers were served, she fought through all the legal maneuvers that his lawyer tried to pull, and a court date was set. In his initial conversations with Margaret, he claimed that no adultery had taken place. Once she sent him a copy of the tape, we stopped hearing that line. Instead, he pointed out that the tape was inadmissible. Margaret didn't even dignify that one with a response. She just sat tight, and as the court date approached, Ant's lawyer finally called Margaret to ask for a settlement conference. The day after hearing the tape, Dave moved out of his apartment with Sailor and into my guest room. He drove over and watched the place until she went out, then called me. The two of us packed up everything he wanted and got out of there in less than 2 hours. He told me, I don't want to see her. I don't want to hear a word she has to say. I just want to get the hell away from her. His eyes started to tear up, and I turned away. Was it a good thing or a bad thing that I knew just how he felt? Sailor left me a couple of angry, cursing messages at home, a nice counterpoint to Ant's remorseful ones. After a day or two, I started screening the messages, deleting any from Sailor or Ant. As soon as I heard their voices, Shelley called Dave at work and sent him letters, but he never responded to them. Margaret was handling his divorce too, and he and I just sat back and let her run the show. To my amazement, the lawsuits against Moran and the health club were resolved first. The one against Moran never went anywhere, he disappeared one day and left no forwarding address. But the health club, eager to avoid negative publicity just as Margaret had predicted, reached a $1.1 million settlement. I signed a pledge of confidentiality and walked away with the largest check I'd ever seen in less than 10 weeks. My brother was a rock, and I guess I was for him too. We lived like two bachelors, going out to eat a lot, taking in a ball game from time to time, or just sitting around and talking over a few beers. We talked about Anne and Sailor, about our lives with them, about how many great women there were out there just waiting for us. It wasn't easy to believe that last bit, and yet we were really able to help each other. I could see as plain as day that there wasn't a thing wrong with Dave that led to Sailor's behavior, she was simply a selfish 304. Likewise, Dave reassured me that my cheating wasn't a reflection on me, just an indication of how screwed up as Kai was. Neither of us probably believed the other one all that much, but it still helped to hear it. Dave was divorced first, as it turned out. He made it clear that he wouldn't talk to Sailor under any circumstances, and so Margaret handled the whole thing. She told him that Sailor had fought for more money at first, but that with the tape, she didn't have a leg to stand on. I went into the office with him the day he had to sign the papers. Shell had already signed them. He smiled grimly, shook Margaret's hand, and thanked her, and then went off to the men's room. I heard him crying through the door when I went to find him. 3 weeks later, it was my turn. We met on a Tuesday, and then me and the two lawyers, and then her lawyer, had agreed to a settlement but insisted on 2 conditions. that I drop adultery as a reason for the divorce, and that I meet privately with and before we sign the papers. I told Margaret I was willing to see and but not willing to drop adultery. Eventually, we agreed that I'd give Anne a chance to persuade me. If she could do so, we'd change it to irreconcilable differences, that old standby. In a weird way, I was looking forward to hearing what Anne had to say. Maybe I'm a masochist, but I loved her for 10 years, and I couldn't really imagine simply walking away without one final conversation. When I got there, and was sitting in the conference room wearing a blue dress, she knew I'd always loved her. Her hair was shorter, and it looked great. She was pale, but she was the same beautiful woman I had loved for so long. "Okay, and it's your meeting," I said neutrally. My heart was pounding, but I tried to look calm. "Just 2 things, all right? Please don't tell me how much you love me, and don't tell me it was just sex." She flushed, and I could see tears welling up in her eyes. "Will, I'm so sorry, but how can I not say those things? I screwed up, plain and simple. I was selfish and thoughtless, and I hurt you. But it was just sex, nothing but a stupid impulse I gave into. You can't imagine how much I've gone over it and over it, how many times I wished I had never done it." "Yes, well, but you did do it, didn't you?" I had no intention of making this easy for her. Just being in the same room with her, knowing that we were about to separate for good and why, broke my heart all over again. I went to the window and gazed out, unwilling to let her see my stricken face. Behind me, I could hear her crying softly. "Baby, it didn't mean anything, you know? It was the dumbest, most hurtful thing I could ever have done to you. I know that, but it meant nothing to me. It has nothing to do with how much I love you." I let her talk a bit more, listening to the pleading tone, the sweet voice I had always loved, but not hearing a single word that I couldn't have predicted. She had nothing to say to me that I didn't already know, and nothing that made a damn bit of difference. After a while, I turned around and came back to the table, sitting down directly across from her. "And just so you know, I still love you very much. But it's over between us." She started to cry again. "You took from me, from us, the most precious thing we had together aside from our love, the bond of trust between us. How could I ever make love to you again, wondering if it was me you were thinking about or Moran and his freak show tool? How would I know whether you were loving me or missing him? And how could I live with you, wondering where you were every time you were 10 minutes late coming home, wondering what you were doing on your lunch hour, wondering whether you'd found another big tool to play around with?" I waited, but she had no reply to make. Finally, between the sobs, she said, "Please, baby, please, couldn't you give me one more chance? And I'll give you a few minutes to think about this one. What if I had met some bimbo with fantastic big jugs and started balling her on the side for a few weeks? Nobody I liked or respected, just a sexy girl who was a fantastic lay, who gave me a degree of pure physical pleasure that I never got from you. And then you found out about it. Could you stay with me? Could you get past the feelings of hurt, the sense of total betrayal? Could you overcome the doubts you'd have about your own attractiveness, the fears that you weren't ever going to be the one I really wanted?" Her eyes were the saddest I had ever seen as she looked up at me. "Well, I don't need to consider it. It's been on my mind for several weeks. Could you please forgive me? Should it be the other way around? Could I take you back?" And no, is the response. I was unable to. I was simply unable to manage those emotions. I am aware of that. I'm pleading with you to do what I was unable to do, to become a braver and stronger person than I ever could be, and to grant me a lifetime to atone for my transgressions and express my love for you. For a minute or two, there was just silence as we both stared at each other, reflecting on our shared history and how we had come to be where we were. I slowly got up, detesting both myself and her for betraying me and now taking it all back on me. I'm not that braver, stronger person you want me to be. I'm not sure whether I can't or won't do it. Farewell. I stood by the ajar door for a brief moment, glancing back to give her the final say. She was crying, her head lowered. She remained silent for a while. Down the hall, Margaret was waiting for me with a surprisingly sympathetic expression on her tough face. "Let her have irreconcilable differences," I said. "It doesn't make a damn bit of difference to me." I sat at my kitchen table with Dave. Despite having a few, we weren't inebriated. "Listen," I responded, "I've made some plans." He gave a nod, and I continued. "I still have almost $800,000 from that settlement after the attorney fees. All of it, less $50,000, is invested in some nice, secure places, so when we get old and frail, we'll have a nice nest egg. However, the remaining $50,000 has been assigned to the Will and Dave Harris Recovery Fund, and we will begin allocating a portion of that money. Starting in 2 weeks, I have a 4-week reservation at a 2-bedroom condo in Cancun reserved for us. Go inform your employer that you will be taking a break. We are going to be 2 gay divorces, 2 fun-loving bachelors, if you get what I mean." All he did was raise an eyebrow, and I chuckled. "No, a whole, gay in the sense of joyous. We've wasted too much time complaining to one another about how much we've been let down. At least as much of a blast as it can be for 2 guys healing from broken hearts, Cancun was. We did a lot of swimming, tennis, sunbathing, and drinking, but we also made sure each other didn't get too crazy. We became slightly fitter, tanner, and farther away from the nightmare we had just experienced with every day that went by. And allow me to add, may God grant me my charming and captivating brother. He recovered from Sailor's blow to his self-esteem, but we still had a lot of female company and he found his old groove. His favorite antics were to see 2 attractive women sitting together, drag me right over to their table, smile condescendingly, and say, "Pardon me, ladies." Damned if it didn't work 75% of the time. "I'd like to introduce my brother, Will Harris, since I know you wouldn't feel comfortable having a stranger buy you a drink." It was then my turn to speak, me the bashful one, saying, "Nice to meet you both. This is Dave Harris, my brother." He would then return, relieved that was resolved. "Now, may we buy you a drink?" Most of the women by now would be laughing or at least smiling, and we would mostly have female company for the evening. Occasionally, the company continued right up until breakfast. After all, Cancun single ladies shared our enthusiasm for having fun. Over those 4 weeks, I think I had maybe 6 different women in my bed. I imagine Dave had a slightly higher number. For the most part, it was light-hearted and enjoyable, just laughing. The first few times I made love to a woman, even though Sailor and Moran were thousands of miles away, I was hesitant and preoccupied with thoughts of Moran and his enormous tool. The women didn't seem to notice, and getting into new relationships got easier every time, even though it was difficult to compete with what I knew he had done to her. Although they might not be appropriate for every situation or phase of life, one-night stands appear to be exactly what Dave and I needed. The only woman who stood out was Shannon, a tall Irish redhead who was a year younger than me. We went about our usual routine, had a few drinks, laughed a lot, had dinner, danced, and then went back to my place to sleep. She was as eager to be with me as I was to be with her. She was seductive and responsive. We were having a blast. It changed later, at approximately 3 in the morning. I woke up and lay in bed for no apparent reason, with Shannon breathing softly next to me as I thought about Sailor and everything we had shared and how it had been taken away from me. I began to cry softly, and before I knew it, Shannon was kneeling next to me, embracing me, and urging me to let it all out. "Sweetie, it's all right." Even though it embarrassed me, I kept going. She continued to reassure me, and eventually I gave in to her pressure and told her the entire tale. The sun was rising when I finished. We tiptoed into the kitchen, where I fixed us breakfast, and she told me her own tale. In addition, there was a divorce, no adultery, just a husband who became more and more aloof, focused on his work, and ultimately, there was no marriage left. She had spent almost 2 years living alone. Without saying a word, we navigated back to the bedroom after eating and made love. It had been a screwing night the previous one, pleasant, exhilarating, but just sex. This time, we found a whole new level of intimacy as we gazed into each other's eyes and whispered softly to one another. My one-night romance with Shannon extended to 4 fantastic evenings. She departed in the afternoon. I believe my brother Dave was a little concerned about me. "Come on, bro, time to meet some new ladies," he said. I muttered, "That one was special." He replied, "I believe you." Will, I really liked her too, but she's gone home now, and we still have 10 days left down here. I'm not yet ready to give up on having fun. He hauled me off to the pool and tennis court, and by evening we were having a conversation with 2 San Francisco secretaries who were visiting another country for the first time. They slept in their own hotel room that night, but Barbara had her first sex on foreign soil with me in my room the following afternoon. Dave and I had dinner at a steakhouse that we both enjoyed. Cancun had been 8 months ago. We spent a lot of time together even though Dave had long since moved into a great apartment that he liked. Dave leaned forward and said softly, "Don't turn around, okay," right after we placed our order. 2 couples had just sat down across the room. An Inome guy was one of them. My heart was pounding suddenly, and I would not have wanted my reaction to come through. I was relieved that the warning had come. After a few moments of waiting, I turned to look around the dance floor. And had already noticed us and was observing me with steady eyes. I waved and smiled at her, a friendly, non-committal smile, and she smiled back. I then made myself turn around and continue talking to my brother. "This is the first time you've seen her, isn't it?" asked he. "Since the divorce?" I gave a nod. I didn't think I'd have this much of a reaction, but I guess the surprise has something to do with it. "Let's enjoy our dinner, please." "Just do me a favor," I said. "Don't tell me anything about her appearance or what she's doing over there. I'd rather not find out." He laughed and told a humorous story about a coworker who had been making out with him for a few weeks. "That's fine, Will," he said in response. He was having fun with the game, but he wasn't all that into her. "How are you, Will?" was spoken in a familiar voice as I felt a hand on my shoulder while we were sipping our coffees and aimlessly observing the dancing couples. I got up and met a smiling face with my own eyes. "Hello again," I managed, surprised once more. "For the sake of nostalgia, how about a dance?" she inquired. And I said, "Of course, I'd be delighted." How lovely she looked, how comfortable she felt in my arms, and how much I missed our better days together. We started off talking about everyday topics like her job, mine, and wasn't it cold for this time of year, before breaking off. I was lost in the feelings of holding her in my arms once more, remembering all the dancing we had done together and how that would be our last activity together. And stepped back from the dance toward the end so she could meet my eyes. "How are you, Will, really?" I didn't owe her anything, but I wanted to be honest. "I'm doing fine." "All right, I suppose. Every day is not the same every day. Dancing with you tonight and seeing you is really powerful. I had no idea that I would feel this strongly." She gave me a serious look. "Yes, I'm not quite feeling well. Every day, I miss you. You have no idea how much it means to me to be in your arms once more." I said nothing because I was at a loss for words. The song's final notes rang out, but she wasn't prepared to part from me. "Have you ever wondered if you made the right decision, Will?" "I'll be completely honest, and okay, I still think about you and me all the time, but I usually don't get much past wondering why you made the wrong decision." Dave said, "Are you sure you're okay, Will?" when I dropped him off. I exhaled. Indeed, it was unexpected, but it was also inevitable. This town is not that large. "Is tomorrow's tennis after work still scheduled?" After Dave said yes, I left for home. She rolled over to face me as I got into bed, even though I was standing in the dark bedroom and trying to undress as quietly as possible. "How was the evening with Dave?" "It was pleasant, albeit peculiar. Since I ran into Anne at the restaurant, perhaps it was for the best that you were exhausted tonight. It's probably a good thing I didn't come because I could have seriously injured her eyes. Will you do me a favor, Shannon? Would you please hold me for a short while?" Her white teeth shone in the shadows as I witnessed her tender smile. "Baby, I'll do better than that. Come on over here, and I'll take care of everything." As we embraced and her soft kisses grazed the side of my neck, I was able to smell her delicious scent. Please feel free to remark below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.